What's up, y'all? It's Joe Budden. It's my favorite part of the holidays, Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. Join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving millions in player rewards.
Download the Prize Picks app today and use code TACKLE and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code TACKLE on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
I'm Allie Roper, a former world history teacher and lover of all things world. When I taught in the classroom, I often had parents say they wish they could sit in on my class and relearn the world history they'd forgotten or had never learned in the first place. Now they could see how important it is. So I created the Wiser World podcast to provide a foundational world education for busy people who need a refresh. Come learn about history, culture, religion, and more by listening to Wiser World wherever you get your podcasts.
Like, when I take a step back, I'm like, no, y'all are demonizing me, and you're celebrating this man as someone that Jesus would choose to lead our Christian nation? I'm like, are you reading the Gospels at all?
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you are listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion and combat the spread of misinformation about the same. How are things today, Dan?
It's a star-spangled day here on the Data Over Dogma show.
I noticed you're wearing a red sweatshirt. And
yeah.
My first impression was a Buffalo Bills jersey, and I was like, it can't be that.
No, it's not that.
Because
I mean, you should be happy. These are Denver Bronco colors.
Yes.
Mostly. Yeah. I'm just kind of an orange and orangey red and blue. Anyway, let's get off of fashion, because most of our listeners, at least, our YouTubers can see, but our listeners can't see what I'm wearing. And let's get on to our guest this week. Do you want to introduce her, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. Today we are very privileged to have with us April Ajoy. Welcome to the show, April.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it very much. And April is the author of a new book, Star-Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. April is another content creator, a podcaster who hosts the Friday shows of the New Evangelicals, and is also has been working in journalism to one degree or another for quite some time. She has been featured on BuzzFeed, CNN, Newsweek, and more, and she's been married to Beecher for 10 years, and they have 2 daughters together, which is wonderful. I am a girl dad with 3 daughters, but some people might be a little more interested to hear about this Beecher connection. But
I mean, I'm going to save it. We're going to save some of the Beecher talk for the after party.
There we go.
If you're really interested in some wacky name talk about Beecher, make sure that you're a patron and come over on Patreon. Yeah.
It's not that common of a name.
No, it isn't. It is not.
It is not.
So there, and even less common, I think, as a first name. So
yes.
So yes, your partner is in rarefied air. But I have met one other person with the first name Beecher, and I'll tell that story later.
Yeah.
And April, you also are you are a TikToker. You put a lot of content out into the world. I think a lot of our listeners probably follow you on TikTok and in other places.
Yeah, that's kind of where it all started, on TikTok. So I don't know what the future of TikTok.
Yeah.
Like,
You two TikTok people are screwed, but. That's why we have a podcast. So
yeah. Well, and I know April from mainly from a lot of thought-provoking content on social media, particularly TikTok and elsewhere, but also a lot of comedy. You like to do some role-playing skits and use comedy to kind of break down walls of defenses, but at least get some a little bit of joy out of what you're doing, which is primarily combating Christian nationalism, combating a lot of the harm that is inherent in Christian nationalism and the kind of fundamentalist, conservative, evangelical Christianity that is so prominent these days. Can you talk a little bit about? We'll get to the content creation later, but can you get everybody up to speed on your background?
Sure.
All right. If that's not too
How
big
far
an
back
ask.
do I go?
I mean, because you are. I mean, let's set the scene, man. This book, Star Spangled Jesus, which, by the way, is a fun exploration of Christian nationalism and everything, starts with the confession that you were unknowingly a Christian nationalist yourself.
Yes. And I do think, as I've studied this topic and then reflected on my own time inside, conservative white evangelicalism, I've realized that one reason why it can be so difficult to stop Christian nationalism is because it kind of hides in plain sight of just American evangelicalism. And that so many people, and I think even today, most people who perpetuate Christian nationalism don't realize that their faith has been co-opted by that ideology. They think they're just being good Christians. And I thought I was just being a good Christian, love God, love people, although exclusions did apply, and vote Republican. We elevated the GOP with God, GOP, GOD. They're pretty much interconnected.
You came into this pretty heavy. You basically came out swinging because you were a pastor's kid, right?
I was a combo because I was a pastor's kid. My grandfather was a pastor of a large church in Dallas when I was growing up. And this was in the 90s, 80s, 90s. So pre-mega churches, really. Like, they weren't really a thing back then. But my grandfather's church had 4,000 members at the time. So that was pretty big.
That's pretty mega.
My dad co-pastored with him when we were home. So I had the pastor's kid experience, but my dad was also an evangelist and kind of a missionary in different points. So we traveled. I was homeschooled. By the time I was 18, I'd been to 31 countries. And then when we were stateside, we traveled in a motorhome, going to all these different churches. And my dad would preach, and then me and my two brothers and my mom, we would sing before he would preach. It was kind of like a family affair. Very immersive.
So almost none of your life was not about Christianity and Jesus. I mean, the motorhome that you traveled in was plastered with the phrase "America say Jesus." Is that right?
Yeah, that was our second motorhome.
Oh, okay.
That was post 9/11 when we really kind of amped up the nationalism part.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh man. So the Righteous Gemstones was probably just a slightly wealthier version of what you grew up with in some ways.
I would say there's definitely similarities to Righteous Gemstones minus the cussing.
Okay.
And I would say I wish they would have tapped, this is a total sidebar, but I wish HBO would have tapped like someone from that world, or had just, because there's so many ways to make that world genuinely funny. That's a little more true, because some of the stuff that's in that show, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's as realistic, but
yeah.
Are you listening, HBO? April is putting herself out there.
Yeah, hire me. I can be a writer.
And I don't want to even get into Netflix and their Mary show, which their only consultant was somebody with a BA. But anyway,
Mr. PhD over here is really upset about it.
It's not a big deal. But you mentioned that this is something a lot of Christians aren't even aware as co-opted evangelical Christianity, and something that a through line of a lot of these chapters was you talking kind of about how you felt intuitively about these things. And there was a slow shift as intuitively it began to make less and less sense to you, and intuitively it began to feel more and more natural to sympathize with the folks that were on the other side of the aisle from you in your childhood. And that's something that within the cognitive science of religion, there's a lot of research on how our intuitive cognition frames our experience of the world around us and our understanding of ourselves. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of experiences kind of lets you know there's something intuitive going on here. There's something internal to this experience that that contributed to this transition?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, where does one begin? I do think like within this world, you have to hold so much cognitive dissonance. And so when you start to question one thing, it just kind of opens up, like you're just more vulnerable to questioning so many things all at once, which is why you're taught, from childhood, especially people who are born into, a fundamentalist religion, you're taught from an early age to not ask questions. And that, questions are almost dangerous. They're the start to the slippery slope. And if you ask too many questions and one day you're going to wake up, you're going to be an atheist, then you're going to burn in hell forever. Like hellfire and where you spend eternity is a big component to the belief system.
Right.
And so, but there were like little things along the way. Like one thing that Christian nationalism relies on is American exceptionalism, because we were taught that God supernaturally blessed America, that God gave the land to George Washington, who, he's like a disciple 2.0. And that, we were miraculously given victory in all of our wars. That, even what happened with the indigenous people was really a blessing for them because we were able to convert them and save their souls. You're not really taught the true history. Like I was taught Christopher Columbus was a good Christian missionary. And so there's this you are kind of shielded, especially if you are homeschooled or given Christian curriculum, or more conservative curriculum. You're shielded from a truer history of America, because if you believe that God is good and that God basically gave America and founded America as a Christian nation, then you can't look at America as ever being the bad guy. And so once you're able, because if America was ever bad, then you have to question in God's sovereignty and if God is good or not, because the two are so interconnected, because you believe America is a Christian nation and we have to save America because God will only bless us if we continue to be Christian. And then that's why you see these culture wars of people fighting gay marriage or abortion or, things that we deemed sin. And that because like Hurricane Katrina, it's like, well, God allowed that to happen because we've let sin into our country. And the way to stop that, it's not climate change. It's God judging us because we are no longer righteous, because we're starting to lose our Christian nation. Yeah. So, but once you learn the true history, like, well, we committed genocide against indigenous people, and that Christians were using the Bible to justify slavery in the Civil War, and that they used it to justify segregation and Jim Crow and all of these things that show Christians in a bad light, then suddenly you lose a good chunk of your foundation of your belief system. And so learning, like true history, like those things kind of started shining a light. Like I remember during post 9/11, when we were dropping bombs on Iraq, looking for, weapons of mass destruction. I remember feeling conflicted about that, but the Christians around me were like, no, this is like a righteous holy war. The Muslims deserve it because their religion is demonic and all these things. We're Christians. We're of God. We're of the one true God. But I remember but we're bombing innocent people, and I was able to kind of squash those thoughts for a while and feel like I had to defend America, because if I didn't, then I'm going through an existential crisis that I was not prepared to go through. But, it was like little things like that along the way that just intuitively I kind of thought about introspectively, but I had enough people around me and watching Fox News and listening to conservative radio and hearing a pastor every Sunday tell me the opposite, that it keeps people in the belief system, because Christian nationalism and evangelicalism, they're especially the Seven Mountain Mandate, which is a dominion theology, which basically is the belief that Christians have to be in control and have dominion of the seven main influences in the world before Jesus can come back. And so that's why they want to have major influence in media. They want to have influence in entertainment. They want people inside their ideology to not have to go to anyone secular. They can get everything from this Christian conservative perspective. So you really are built in a giant echo chamber unless you intentionally seek out other things. But if you do that and you're still in it, you have all these people being like, you can't trust that source. Because anything not Christian is satanic. And so, I think there's like a new rise in satanic panic too, where anything not Jesus-y is of the devil, and they're trying to, the devil's coming after your children. Like there's that one pastor, Kent Crispus, from the pulpit, cursed the Barbie movie because of wokeness or whatever. And then another pastor said that the Barbie movie would unleash millions of demons onto your children. And it's just silly stuff like that. But there's people that genuinely believe that. And so all this fear mongering gives people a reason to doubt their own doubts.
Well, and it also, I think it primes people, when you are trained from birth, as you were, to believe in all of these demons, to believe that, everyone that isn't with us is satanic, is awful, is bad. There's a whole section in your book about conspiracy theories, QAnon, all of that stuff. Like, people have been primed to believe outrageous things. Mm-hmm. So then when they hear, that Hillary Clinton has, a bunch of children locked up in a pizza parlor, they buy it. It feels acceptably real to them.
Yeah, I mean, the rapture theology is a huge belief in a lot of mainstream evangelicalism that doesn't get talked about too much. Like, you don't hear about it unless you're inside as much. But I believed that until I was like 30. As a grown woman, I believed that at any moment I'd hear a distant trumpet and that I'd get sucked up into the sky naked to meet Jesus in the air, because that's like Left Behind canon, like that you left your pile of clothes behind, which is weird because we're also purity culture. So I guess once you're floating in the sky, like the lust thing isn't a problem anymore. But maybe magical
fig leaves will appear for you.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. But like if you can believe that, which wasn't a mainstream belief in Christianity until the 1800s, and I was pissed when I learned that, because I was taught like that. This is basically like Apostle Paul canon, and I'm like, So. But if you can believe that, then it's not hard to believe that there's this evil secret society that's controlling everything, that sacrifices babies to Satan and drinks children's blood to stay young. Like you already believe in the big bad Satan. So it's an easy jump to make.
And all the heathens believe that the world was created out of nothing through magic anyway, or through the Big Bang, which
it takes more faith to be an atheist.
And these are things that you're conditioned as a child to accept. And if that is the foundation of your worldview, if those are the logs that build the foundation of your worldview, then it's not difficult to interpret new information in light of that. That becomes the interpretive lenses through which you see all this new stuff, and naturally you're going to want to interpret it according to your worldview, make it fit, find a place for it to fit, until suddenly it won't fit.
I'm Allie Roper, a former world history teacher and lover of all things world. When I taught in the classroom, I often had parents say that they wished they could sit in on my class and relearn the world history they'd forgotten or had never learned in the first place. Now that they'd grown up, they realized just how important world history is for giving context to current events around the globe. So I created the Wiser World podcast to provide a foundational world education for curious, busy people who need a refresh. My style of teaching is approachable and easy to digest, designed for people who know little to nothing about the topic. Bonus points, the episodes are usually under 45 minutes. The 101 episodes dive into modern history of various countries such as Iran, Israel, or North Korea. We also learn about various holidays, cultural practices, religions, and other global topics to remind us of our shared humanity. Come learn with us. Wiser World is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Sleep Cove podcast can help you. Hi, I'm Christopher Fitton, the voice and clinical hypnotherapist behind Sleep Cove. Sleep Cove features sleep hypnosis, meditations, and bedtime stories, all designed to help those of you who struggle at night to achieve a restful and peaceful night's sleep. Search for Sleep Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see why Sleep Cove helps millions of people sleep deeply all night long.
And you shared a story in your book that I rather enjoyed about working. I don't know if you were with CBN or you were doing journalism of some kind. And you were sent out to do an interview with a gay couple.
Oh yeah, I was interning at the Dallas NBC affiliate. In grad school.
I used to live just north of Frankfurt and the Tollway. And that's where I actually became LDS, and I left to go live in Uruguay for a couple of years doing a proselytizing mission down there. Our church was right across the street from Prestonwood Baptist Church.
Been to Prestonwood many times.
Yeah, so I know the area well. It was fun to hear some of those names again. But can you walk through this story briefly about this time something didn't seem to fit the way you had been conditioned to structure your worldview?
Yeah, so I got my master's in journalism at Regent University, which is Pat Robertson's school. It's on the same campus as CBN, which is the Christian Broadcasting Network. So for my summer internship, as part of that program, I got an internship at the NBC DFW affiliate. And my first day on the job, and you have to understand too, at Regent, they kind of trained us to, like, their motto is Christian leadership to change the world. So there was this underlying message that no matter what job you have, even if it's in the secular world, like, you're still called to be a Christian first, and that your job is, like, wherever you are, that's your mission field. So you're kind of being trained.
That is so intense.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, and that was nothing new. I had already been believed that from a child, like, that there's no greater calling than trying to win souls for Jesus, and that you should do that wherever you are. Yeah. So keep that in mind. Like, that's my that's my mindset. My very first day at this internship, they assigned me to do an interview of this gay couple because they were getting some pushback for being featured in a JCPenney catalog as for Father's Day, because they were two gay dads together with their kids. And I remember, like, the internal just conflict of, okay, this is my moment. I know that the media, like, portrays homosexuality as good or normal, because at this point I believed that homosexuality was a sin, it was an abomination, it was a choice either by demonic influence or they were demon possessed, and that's not an exaggeration. Like, that is what I was taught,
right?
And so I was like, this is my chance. I had, like, my official questions that my bosses saw, and then I had, like, questions prepared too. It's kind of like gotchas, I guess. Like, if I had the boldness, I'm like, well, isn't it better for a child to have a mom and a dad? Stupid stuff like that. But when I got there, which my heart was pounding, I felt like I was going into the lion's den, like, behind enemy lines. Like, here I am, a Christian, going to talk to gay people, like married gay people, which this was before it was even legalized. So it was, like, extra,
evil,
tragic, I guess, in my mind. And so I walk in, and they have pictures of them and their family on the wall that they had adopted, and they're smiling, and their kids look happy and healthy and thriving. And I introduced myself, and they were so kind to me, and I didn't know how to take that. And I was like, well, they must just think that, like, I'm on their side, like, blah, like, So I literally, like, I remember thinking I need to sneak in something Christian and just see how they respond. So I remember being like, oh yeah, well, when I went to church, da 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 da. And then one of them was like, oh yeah, I used to go to like some Methodist church or something. I think they actually went to a Methodist school. And I was like, like inside just freaking out because I did not know how to process this information. Like, wait a minute, you're gay, but you've been to church. And me saying Jesus, you're not manifesting any demons. And I don't know how to deal with this. So I finished the interview. I had this like gut instinct, like my brain was telling me, you like, this is your chance to show what they're really like. You need to ask them these questions, like be a good Christian, like da da da. But my heart was saying like, these are two really kind, good people. And I didn't feel like I needed to do that I should do that. I felt like it would have been wrong.
The demons got you.
I know.
Got
I know. So I didn't say anything. Like at the end, I was like, well, God bless you guys. And they were so nice. Like I was just an intern and they were like, you did such a good job. Like best of luck in your career. And I was like, thank you. And I just remember walking away from that really confused, but I still was not ready to go down that path of questioning, like, why were these guys so nice to me, knowing I was this Christian person? And, I just kind of shoved it down and be like, well, Satan can appear as an angel of light. And that was how I was able to, not have to think about that for a while. But that interaction stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of folks who build up that kind of worldview. They have a lot of defensive walls that they put up. And something that a lot of research has suggested is that they don't let down their defenses unless there are significant personal experiences or close personal relationships that kind of compel them to let down their defenses and begin to think critically about these things. But at the same time, when you begin to think critically about these things, they often represent a significant threat to one's own worldview, which means the defenses go right back up and they tend to get stuck on a shelf somewhere where you're like, I'm gonna worry about that later. I'm just gonna stick that on the shelf there, and we're gonna go back to this worldview that we're comfortable in, and we don't want to compromise.
And I felt so much guilt afterwards that like I wasn't a good Christian, that I had failed God and like literally like had to ask God for forgiveness because I felt guilty, even though I felt like in my heart is like I did the right thing, but my brain was like, no, you didn't. You dirty scum.
Oh, that is such
you should have terrorized that loving couple who was
right.
That's what an odd way for your brain to kind of be mean to you.
Well, because you're taught like tough love, like love the sinner, hate the sin. Like the best way to love them is to tell them that they're going to hell and be truthful because you can save their soul. Like, I mean, you see.
Turns out that's not very loving, actually. But
right, yeah, no,
you were definitely going back to how you were taught. I wanted you to tell us the story in the book about you as a kid, you and your siblings being trained to witness to like servers at restaurants. Oh, the cringe is hardcore on that. But talk to us a little bit about like what that looked like, and maybe give us a story or two from that era of your life.
Yeah,
because I imagine you went to restaurants a lot if you were traveling around so much.
We did. Literally, I mean, my brothers and I would argue about whose turn it was to witness, which witness was our word for proselytizing, but to witness to the waitstaff. And usually that just meant, we would just say, Jesus loves you. If it was really successful, then my dad would get to pray with them and like lead them in the sinner's prayer. And then my dad could talk about it in a sermon later. And then we would feel very proud of ourselves if we got like a shout out in the sermon. So yeah, it just became a thing. And then at some point we started keeping tallies of like, well, I saved so many people. I have more than you. And it was like sibling rivalry, but religious trauma. But yeah, I remember one time, and my dad told this story because he thought it was hilarious, but I was probably 6 or 7 and my brother was 5. So my two brothers, they're a year and a half younger than me. So they were around 5 and we went to a restaurant, and it was my brother Matt's turn to witness to the waitstaff. Like we knew the order. Like, so we knew like, okay, it's Matt's turn. I'll be quiet. And the waitress came over, and Matt was just like, hey, Jesus loves you. And she was like, great. And then he just goes, take my hand. Because we would, whenever we would pray with someone, we would say, my dad would be like, take my hand, and then lead them in the sinner's prayer. And he just like went straight for closing the deal, which is what we called for when they could say the sinner's prayer.
Right.
And he's like, take my hand. So she did. Because, I mean, who's going to say no to like a 5-year-old kid with a bowl cut? And he was like, all right, now repeat after me. Just say, dear Jesus. She goes, dear Jesus, I am a very bad person. And she repeated it. She goes, she kind of looked, and I looked at my parents, and they kind of looked. And anyway, she goes, I'm a very bad person. And then Matt's like, forgive me of my sins. She goes, forgive me of my sins. Amen. And then my parents kind of gave her like an apologetic, look. And we were not convinced of the efficiency of that conversion, but my dad told it in stories everywhere we went. So
as the person on this show right now who has not had the experience of trying to make strangers believe in my beliefs, when you guys did that, and you say, one of the kids would say Jesus loves you, and if it went well, dad would pray with them. Did you guys feel like that you had actually converted someone to Christianity in that moment? Is that the story that you told each other?
Yeah. I mean, we believed that once you said the sinner's prayer and you confessed Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and asked for forgiveness of sins, that you were a Christian. Which I do think like that inherent theology is a reason why you see so many terrible people in evangelicalism, because they don't really hold people accountable. As long as you say the prayer and ask for forgiveness, it's like, well, God forgave them, so we should forgive them too.
Right.
But yeah, we believed it was just like an instant thing.
It's this one weird trick to turn everybody Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Until it comes to questions of orthodoxy, where you can evidently lose your salvation, but at the same time can't lose your salvation.
Yeah,
I know this strikes me as a pretty interesting case of what within the cognitive sciences we call costly signaling, because it's a behavior that you would engage in order to display to others within the in-group that you are willing to incur the costs associated with towing the party line, with showing that you are faithful to the group standards. And I think the costly signaling can sit so close to the surface in a lot of groups like evangelicalism. In the Latter-day Saint tradition, the same is true, although the proselytizing thing, it's usually limited to just one of these 18-month or 2-year missions where we would have to go out and keep track of how many discussions, we called them, we had with folks, and how many times we would lead them in prayer or take them through these steps of conversion. And then you have groups like Jehovah's Witnesses, where that's a full-time responsibility. They're supposed to keep track of those kinds of things for every week of their life. It's such an interesting example, I think, of how close to the surface that kind of boundary maintenance and those kinds of expectations sit, the more religious you get, where it's something you got to do in front of your parents on a daily basis.
For us, that was certainly, I'm sure, part of it. But we were also taught, and I believed, that if I didn't witness to whoever I came in contact with, and that person were to die that day or die shortly after, that their blood would be on my hands.
Oof.
Because I didn't save their soul. Or I didn't at least plant a seed. Like, as long as you could say Jesus loves you or plant some sort of seed, you could wipe your hands of it and be clear. But if not, like, it was a very, like, I had a good childhood. Like, my parents were really great parents, but the ideology, which wasn't really my parents' fault because they were indoctrinated too. It was just a vicious cycle, but it was a really not fun in the mind to constantly, especially once I got to a certain age, like middle school or high school, and I started realizing that proselytizing isn't cool. And so I started witnessing less.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would feel so guilty every time I didn't witness. And I would just pray like, oh, I hope that person doesn't die today. And then they go to hell and it's my fault.
It's such a mind-bending thing, and there's a cruelty to it to say that, to put that much pressure on anyone, let alone a child. It just feels the cognitive dissonance of like, Jesus is love, but these people might all have eternal consequences and it would be my fault. And like, that just feels so separate, so opposite from each other.
Well, and that's part of the cognitive dissonance, that you can believe that God loves us unconditionally and then also believe God will send you to hell for eternity if you don't believe the right things. Yeah. And in this world, in like a Christian nationalist ideology, white evangelicalism, fundamentalist, whatever you want to call it, it's conditioned on having the right beliefs. They honestly could care less what you actually do as long as your beliefs line up, which I think is one reason why they can dismiss so many of like Donald Trump's sins, because he's giving them power and lining up with their beliefs, at least verbally. Right. And it's the same thing with just look at what they're doing with Russell Brand right now. I don't know if you've seen, like, he has publicly converted to Christianity, right, while in an active, ongoing assault allegations against him. But like, he went on Tucker Carlson, and the in-group of like right-wing Christianity has welcomed him in despite his bad behaviors, because he is now aligned theologically and ideologically with them. Whereas someone like me, or y'all probably too, who are just progressive and like ideologically we line up differently in beliefs, but we're squeaky clean. Like, I've never assaulted anybody. I don't have any allegations against me. I still love Jesus. Like, I still identify a Christian, just progressive. But in their minds, I'm a heretic. I'm a false prophet. I'm, I'm under demonic influence, and I cannot be welcomed into those circles. And it's solely based on belief.
Yeah.
And that's something we see all over Christianity, at least public Christianity today, is it's all about structuring power and values and boundaries. It's not necessarily about following Jesus. It's not following the lamb slaughtered. It is trying to promote rather the conquering, riding in on a white horse with a sword drenched in blood Jesus. Storm the Capitol, Jesus, rather than love your neighbor, Jesus. Though I noticed toward the end of there was a story you also told toward the end of the book that reminded me of something that happened in my own life, and contributed to you saying you're still trying to work through your relationship with your father, or your father's legacy. But you said you came to him one time when you were a child and said, "I get it now. Boys preach and girls sing, which is why you preach and mommy and I sing." And in a shocking turn of events, your father did not say that a girl. What did your father say?
Yeah, I was probably I was young, maybe 4 or 5, and he got down on his knee, like eye level with me, and looked me in the eye, and he was like, "No, April, that's not right. Girls can preach." And he said, "If you want to be a preacher, you be a preacher, and don't let any man tell you you can't do something just because you're a girl." Wow. And that was a very it was a very interesting world to live in, because I felt very empowered from my immediate family. And my dad always like, "You can do whatever you want. Like, you can be president. You can do it." Like, he was very much a feminist when it came to me. And he believed in female pastors. But at the same time, the church at large, like, I never saw a female pastor, except for maybe Joyce Meyer on TV. So I was getting one message at home and a different message from the church at large. But I do really believe, and another thing that my dad like always taught me was to always stand up for what you believe is right, even, whatever consequences may come. And to my dad's credit, like, even though he perpetuated some harmful ideologies and then passed that down to me, he was a true believer and like really believed what he was doing and believed that he was doing the right thing. And he always stood up for what he believed was right. I mean, he even went against the church sometimes, and lost meetings, lost some different things because people didn't like what he was saying. And so like without having that just empowerment from my dad, like I don't know if I would have had the courage to, once I realized things were wrong, to speak out against it. And that was one reason like I dedicated my book to my dad too, because I'm like, I think, he's passed now. So he hasn't gone through the last like 12 or 13 years of life experience with us. That included a lot of huge things. Like one of my brothers came out as gay. So I still think he'd be proud of me, but it's been a difficult journey just reconciling, his legacy, because when he died, we were on the same page. So I've never been in a relationship with my dad, where we disagreed. And I know like him in 2011, when he passed, would disagree with me now. But I also know he was a good person. Like he meant well, which, doesn't negate harm. But, if anything, it just keeps me grounded to know that even the far right people who are causing so much harm, and I'm not talking about the people at the top, but just like your average everyday churchgoer who also believes that they're just doing the right thing because everyone around them is telling them that this is, biblical values and we got to fight for God and all these things. Like I can hold some grace for them because I know where I came from. And if anything, it just gives me like hope. Well, they can change too. I changed. They can change, and just to try to hold them in just more nuance than just, pure evil. Because I think no one's really pure evil. We all have nuance.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Calm Cove podcast can help you sleep deeply all night long. Calm Cove has deeply relaxing meditation music and ambient sounds like ocean waves and crackling fires. All of our episodes are designed to help you relax and to fall asleep fast. Calm Cove is brought to you by the team behind Sleep Cove, the sleep podcast that consists of spoken word hypnosis, meditation, and stories. So if you want to listen to a beautiful soundscape tonight, search for Calm Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see how we're helping millions of people relax and go to sleep every night.
So I think one of the things that's going to be tricky about this conversation, because we do have to get to Christian nationalism as a concept, because that's a big part of the story of your book. One of the things that people often get very uncomfortable about is when shows that are dedicated to religion or this, the religious ideas delve into the political. But I mean, you mentioned it earlier. You said there was no line to blur. Like it was if you're a good Christian, you are a Republican, and ne'er the twain, there's no median point that separates those in the worldview that you grew up with. So talk a little bit about what led you to question all of that, and what led you on that journey to start disagreeing with the theology that you were raised with.
Sure. Also a big question. I don't know how detailed
you don't have to get too detailed. People can buy the book. They can read it. It's fine.
Here's a good segue though. You talked about your dad passing in 2011, not knowing how he would respond maybe to seeing things now, but your mom was still there, and your mom changed somewhat. And you have a story about your mom being confronted with problems with the church as a result of the financial arrangement that had been set up following your father's, before your father passed and then after he passed. That might be a good stepping stone into discussing how entrenched some of these Christian nationalism is within these worldviews.
Sure. Yeah. So before my dad had passed, there was a contract where a larger church that had multiple campuses basically kind of bought the church building and the church from my parents. And as like part of the deal, my dad would receive, as like a pastor emeritus, a certain amount of money for the rest of his life. And then if he were to die, that would be passed to my mom until she died. So that contract was in place, and my dad died, which honestly, my dad dying was also a huge part in my changing my beliefs, because when you're in this world, your theology is so intertwined with your politics that when you start to question one, which for me was like name it and claim it faith healing, because we were Pentecostal, that you just kind of simultaneously start questioning the other because they're very conflated. But so this pastor started paying my mom as usual, and it was fine for several years. And then Donald Trump gets elected president. And I'll say too, Donald Trump coming on the scene was a big wake up call for me as well, because even though I was still very Republican at the time when he started running in the primary, I was like, there's no way we're going to elect this guy. He's so immoral, like obviously immoral. Like, and because I remember what they said about Bill Clinton, if he would lie to his wife, he'd do so much worse to the American people.
He'll cheat on the American people. Yeah. If he cheats on his wife, he'll cheat on the American people, which is what the GOP was convinced of. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, well, clearly we don't believe that anymore.
Right.
And not just, they're like, well, we're voting for a president, not a pastor. I'm like, you've never said that before. So anyway, so that was a wake up call. I don't need to go into that. We all know that story. But in the process of Trump's presidency, my mom, her and I are very close, and my brother came out, and she went on a journey to becoming queer, accepting, on behalf of her son, just like I did for my brother. And so she started kind of questioning things, and she didn't understand the evangelical support of Trump either. Like, she technically voted for him in 2016, but she kind of held her nose because she was still like, well, I'm a Christian, I got to vote Republican, which dies hard. That is hard to kill. But so over those next few years, the pastor that was over the church that was paying my mom just started sending her like very conspiracy type videos, like some QAnon related, some, about Trump being God's chosen, like Trump's this like hero of the faith, that Christians are being persecuted. That, when Joe Biden came on the scene and ran, like that I don't know if he said he was the Antichrist, but he definitely ran in circles of people that said he was the Antichrist. And my mom was just like, no, but she was nice. So she kind of like would appease him and like text back like, oh, interesting, because like he's financially paying her,
Right.
And at one point, like you could tell he was clearly wanting her and us, because he sent her like a 3-part DVD series about the end of the world that he wanted her to watch privately with her 3 adult children who lived in different states, and then wanted her to destroy the DVDs afterwards.
Whoa, that
I know.
That feels a little red flaggy. I'm just going to say it.
I know. It was odd. But yeah, so anyway, and then my mom actually went with me to a few Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. And I made the cardinal sin where I admitted that I was going to vote for Joe Biden, a Democrat. And so he would like text her and was like, can I have your daughter's number? I would love to tell her all the things that Trump's done for the Black people. And which this pastor's white, by the way, if you couldn't tell. And I was like, Mom, do not give him my number. I have no interest. So he's like trying to get our whole family to vote for Trump for whatever reason. Like it really mattered to him that we vote for Donald Trump. And so the day of the election, after, we all voted, like literally the day of the election, later that day, he texts my mom and asked her who she voted for. And at this point, my mom was like, I could not vote for Donald Trump, but she still couldn't vote for the Democrat. So she literally just like, I think she wrote in John Kasich or something. So she writes this long, and my mom, if you meet her, she is the sweetest, kindest human on the planet. Like she would never hurt a fly. So she writes this long thing. She's like, well, I just felt I couldn't really vote for either candidate. So I wrote in someone, but I did vote for some local conservatives and blah, blah, blah. I just felt like after I really prayed about it, blah, like she's just being sweet. So then immediately he texts back and he's like, will you call me? We need to discuss your financial support. And we had kind of seen the writing on the wall. Like there had been some signs that he might be, leaning that way. And so she had talked to her lawyer, and the lawyer's like, hey, if they ever discuss your contract, get it in writing. Like, don't talk on the phone. And so she asked him, like, well, can you just email it to me, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, well, since you won't talk to me on the phone, like, I think it's best that we end your financial support. And my mom was like, over who I voted. And so, like, technically, he never specified that that was the reason, but it literally, like, context wise, you can. So yeah, anyway, so my mom was a widow, which is like one of the classes that Jesus is like, take care of the poor, the orphan, the widow. Right. And here's a pastor who literally was like, nah, I'm not going to take care of this widow anymore because she didn't vote for Donald Trump, allegedly.
That's crazy. That is,
yikes.
And infuriating too. It's just, so often we see with, and your book is riddled with stories of this, people who say they believe one thing, but I mean, they believe that, like Dan said, the Jesus of storming the Capitol and not the Jesus of the Beatitudes or whatever.
Yeah, well, when the foundation is structuring power, and this is a unique opportunity to have an awful lot of proximity to the most power on the planet, they've got to prioritize. Yeah. And so, the taking care of the poor and the orphan and the widow fades to the background when we need somebody who's going to get rid of Roe v. Wade, an identity marker entirely generated in the 1970s, precisely for the sake of arrogating political power, and in the 70s because they wanted to go back to being able to keep black students out of universities like Bob Jones University and other universities like that. So there's such a bizarre conflation of political power and religious ideologies there. One very clearly has priority over the other these days.
Well, it was very eye-opening for me in 2016, because I voted third party in 2016, because I also had not yet felt I could vote for a demon rat, as we like to call them. But the amount of hate that I received from people I knew from church because I wouldn't vote for Trump was very eye-opening for me, because suddenly, just because I disagreed on this one thing, which was not even a theological issue, it was just, I don't think my own morals and integrity won't let me vote for a man like that. Yeah. And they were like, no, you're thwarting the will of God. Like, someone literally said that to me. Someone said that I was disappointing my late father and that God would judge me. Gosh. And I'm like, honestly, for the first Trump presidency, I felt like I was just being gaslit every day, because we were still going to a white evangelical church. And I felt, the Christianese dies hard, but I really felt in my spirit, I'm like, this is wrong. Like, we should not be celebrating this man and championing this man as some hero of the faith. But anytime I would say something about it, I was the one that was demonized. I was ousted so quickly. Like, my lifelong achievements in the evangelical world, like, I was a producer for CBN. I wrote my own Christian Nationalist song and sang it on the Jim Bakker Show. Like, I had dedicated my entire life to making America a Christian nation and to spreading the gospel. And it was immediately completely discounted when I didn't vote for Donald Trump. And that was really eye-opening for me, just to realize how much of my version of Christianity had become about groupthink and not about actually following the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah. When you started to see those cracks forming in what you thought you were a part of versus what it turned out you were a part of, talk a little bit about that process of like noticing those things and how it felt as you were sort of coming to some new realizations about it.
I was pissed. Like, I definitely went through an anger stage. Because we didn't stop going weekly to church until the pandemic, because it forced us to. Right. So through all this, I'm still going to church every Sunday. I'm still part of the worship team. And I found myself being leaving church angry every Sunday, because I saw these people around me worshiping Jesus, crying out, acting like so morally superior in church because we're worshiping Jesus and blah, blah, blah. The same Jesus that I was worshiping. But then throughout the week, I would see them post the most hateful, racist crap about, Black Lives Matter, about Joe Biden, about trans people or queer people, like just immigrants. Like Jesus literally said, welcome the foreigner. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, it was just, it was such I was just so mad because I felt like I was actually trying to follow Jesus. And I really felt like what I was doing was led by the sacred in kind of starting to question these things because they were appearing to be harmful finally. But instead of any self-reflection, I was the one that was in the wrong. And so I felt like I was going crazy. I was mad and I felt like I was going crazy. And there were moments where I was like, am I the crazy one? Like, am I the one in the wrong? Because I had so many people telling me like, God doesn't want you to do this. God doesn't want you to speak out against Donald Trump. That's his man. He chose him, blah, blah, blah. And I remember praying in 2020 because I was just like so confused. I remember praying and I asked God, I was like, God, I don't get it. I really don't believe that Donald Trump's your man. But if you want me to vote for him, like you have to send me a sign and I'll do it. If you really want me to vote for that man and I believe this is you saying this, I'll vote for Donald Trump. That sign never came, so I never did. But like it literally, like I was being gaslit so much that I felt compelled to pray that prayer. And then I got pissed. Like when I take a step back, I'm like, no, y'all are demonizing me and celebrating someone who is a serial adulterer who says the worst, like the most hateful things about women and people of color and immigrants and Muslims. And you're celebrating this man as someone that Jesus would choose to lead our Christian nation. I'm like, are you reading the Gospels at all? And honestly, though, the Gospels were a through line for me. Like anytime I felt like I was the crazy one, I would just go back and read the teachings of Jesus. I'm like, no, here he is saying, lay down your weapons. And they're like, guns, we need more. I'm like, no, you don't. So it was a lot of conflicting emotions until I finally really COVID hitting and the way the white church especially turned that into some sort of Christian persecution narrative. Like, look, Joe Biden and Trump, like it's the government. They want to shut down our right to worship. I'm like, no, it's a freaking global pandemic and people are dying. And like, they couldn't even wear a mask or social distance. And they made it about their rights. And I was like, no, I feel so, that emboldened me to be like, nah, I'm right. I'm in the right here. Y'all are the ones in the wrong.
Not gonna lie, you had me in the first half, but I see through it now. Yeah, I think you close with a very lovely line about how John 3:16 doesn't say for Jesus so loved America. It says for Jesus so loved the world, but they want to throw up these boundaries. They want to continually ask, well, who is my neighbor? Not him, not her,
right?
Not those people over there. It violates the weightier matters of the law that Jesus talked about. It's such a hypocritical attempt to appropriate the moral authority of Jesus while directly denying pretty much all of the moral frameworks for which he advocated. It's such a tragedy that so many folks have been conditioned since their childhood to accept that worldview that they can't see past it and they cannot accept questioning it because they know that ostracization is the next thing that's going to happen.
Well, and you can lose everything. Like you lose your community, especially if you work in ministry and your livelihood is dependent on you keeping the same beliefs for your entire life. You have built-in additional reason to just never question things.
Yeah.
Although, if there's one thing we can learn from your story, it's that it's that there is hope on the other side of the thing, including hope for a very popular TikTok account. So maybe that's a good trade-off. You never know. You might lose your whole community, but your TikToks will do well.
And oh my gosh, it's funny though you say that because I get accused of only changing for internet clout.
Of course you do.
I'm like,
Of
yeah.
course you do.
And they'll be like, you were never a Christian. I'm like,
Yeah. Well, and that's how they protect their own worldview.
Right.
Because
Right.
they believe that a Christian wouldn't do that, and so you must have been a pretend Christian all along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And it's funny too, because I said those same things about people I knew that left. I'm like, oh, well, they just never really believed. You know, Satan got another one. So it's just weird seeing my own playbook used against me.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Well, and surely going back and having to reevaluate all of those times you said that about other people and being like, oh, wait, no, that person probably had a genuine like moment of reflection and or many moments of reflection.
Yeah.
And now we wait and see until January 10th. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments. They have opted to hear the arguments, and we will see if Trump comes to the rescue.
I know.
And,
I mean,
and
Trump's
is our
kind of hinted
savior
at being
like
he's like, I have a warm spot for TikTok, which, to be fair, TikTok did push right-wing content more than left-wing content. So it probably did help him win the election.
Yeah.
But man, you know what? If Trump can save TikTok,
Yeah.
I won't be mad about it.
If he's consistent about anything, it's about doing favors for people who help him out,
Right?
and then immediately abandoning them afterwards. But so we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, April Ajoy, how do people find you? They on all of the social medias. You are out there. Your handle is just April Ajoy. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Threads.
Omnipresence, yes.
I am still on Twitter. I don't know how long I'll be on Twitter. I've gotten death threats on there before, so it's not my favorite place.
I had to delete my account. I couldn't live in that environment anymore. But it's gotten rough over there. But yeah, go follow April, everybody. Check out the book Star Spangled Jesus, available now wherever you get pieces of paper with words on them.
Mm-hmm. And there's also an audiobook that I narrate too.
Oh, you narrated the audiobook. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's
very
great.
Cool.
That's great.
I'm looking forward to recording the audiobook for my own book too. So I'm
it was a fun
process.
experience because it was the first time I was able to read the book without having to edit it or look for errors.
Right.
So
Cool.
I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will. I'm looking forward to it. But I haven't interrupted Dan's closing spiel.
That's okay. We're all right. April, thank you so much for joining us. Anyone who wants to can become a patron of the show and hear more April. You're going to join us for the after party. Just go over to patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. And that's where the after party is going to be happening. You'll hear a bunch of stories about the name Beecher. That's going to be fun, among other cool stuff. And if you need to write into us, please do so. It's contact@dataoverdogmapod.com. April, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody.
Data Over Dogma is a member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. It is a production of Data Over Dogma Media, LLC, copyright 2024, all rights reserved.